Around the table, I've got the politicians from the five main parties in the city. That is the Conservative, Geoff Gollop, Labour Group Leader Helen, Holland, LibDem's also Group Leader, he's Gary Hopkins, Tim Malnick, he's a Green Councillor, and Michael Frost from the UK Independence Party. And I'd like to start on the second part by talking about something that Helen Holland mentioned in the first part, which was the LEP, Local Enterprise Partnership, because these kinds of organisations, partnerships, are starting to do more and more of what used to be done by council committees. And I'd just like to just go around the table, starting with you, Geoff, and ask you whether you think that these kinds of partnerships are working, are they successful, and particularly the LEP, Local Enterprise Partnership.
Well, I think the Local Enterprise Partnership is very much working in the right direction. They're tasked with creating jobs, creating investment into the west of England. Unfortunately, we're saddled with that name because if you ask anybody what they think of the west of England, they'd all come up with a different answer. Basically, the west of England is what used to be the county of Aden. And the Local Enterprise Partnership is making headway in investment, creating jobs, and it's providing a mechanism for the local authorities to work together, which might prove a bigger challenge if they were left to their own devices to do that, but working with industry to achieve is giving a real opportunity to move forward. It provides a mechanism for government funding for some of the bigger transport projects that we need in the region as well. So I would say it's moving forward, but like so many things, it can actually do with more funding, and the LEP is only funded from funds that the local authorities can procure from central government, and it's restricted.
The thing that bothers me is that a lot of these meetings, local enterprise partners, is spending quite a lot of public money, but they're not open and accountable. They're business people. I mean, I've just got a list of those who were actually send people to. I think, am I right? The local authorities will send a councillor to these meetings, and also they're also the CBI, the Institute of Directors, and Business West, and something else called FSB. I think it's the Federation of Small Businesses. Elect people to these bodies, and they then spend public money. Well, is that right that they should be spending public money?
But any money that is spent on behalf of Bristol would go through the normal scrutiny process within Bristol for it to be spent in the appropriate way.
Helen,
I think that there are differing views about how good LEPs in general are, and then about how good or not the West of England one is. And you're right, business has got the greatest voice on there. Each council can only send its leader, and the meetings are not really transparent, although they're, as I understand it, trying harder to put some issues onto their website. But I think we do need to see a reform of the LEP, because if it's public money, then it ought to be a publicly accountable body. And I think that councillors don't feel as if we've got any handle on what the LEP does. And so some of those issues that I alluded to earlier about the skills gap and, Bristol people getting the jobs that are coming into our city. I think that maybe the social agenda isn't as high on the LEP's agenda as we would wish it to be. So they're probably happy if jobs have been created. They're not saying who are those jobs for, and are we making sure that Bristol people from South Bristol who've been excluded from a lot of the up and coming job sectors are getting those jobs. So we need them to focus on making sure that work is done, and that it becomes economically better off area, but for everybody, not increasing the gap.
Gary Hopkins for the Lib Dems. What were your thoughts about the Local Enterprise Partnership? It's not a very visible organisation, is it? But it's actually spending quite a lot of public money.
No, and unfortunately quite a lot of what goes on in the City Council isn't very visible either to a lot of councillors and the public, so it's not unique. I think, in terms of the major transport investment, etc., actually all those initiatives that are progressing at the moment were initiated by the partnership of the four authorities previously, before the Local Enterprise Partnership became involved. Now, I think that the key to this is that we were told, and there's a lot of truth in it, that you can get quicker decisions with the structure that we have at the moment. And that's fine. But those quicker decisions have got to be available for scrutiny. Check how the money is actually spent. Is it doing the job that it needs to do? And that's what we need to have, and it's what we need to have within a city council. I mean, I sat through a meeting, as did Helen the other night, where we were looking at the new energy company for Bristol, a wholly owned company by the city council. Great. We put forward the plan for this initially about 4 years ago, and it's now going to become a reality. But you know what? Councillors who are representing the people in Bristol were not to have a scrutiny role in terms of looking at, is the balance right? Is the environmental policy right? Is the financial policy and how it actually deals with vulnerable customers right? So we are not, at the moment, destined to have any influence on that at all. And that, quite frankly, is disgraceful.
Tim Malnick for the Greens, what are your thoughts about this local enterprise partnership?
I think
one of the things, before you start, one of the things I noticed that they were involved in is helping fund Weston College, for example, to buy the Winter Gardens. I mean, this is out of the city, but down in Weston, for £1. And a lot of people were complaining, including the Civic Society down in Weston, saying, well, hang on, this is a massive asset transfer to a much less public body from the Weston Council. I think it's actually North Somerset Council. So things are going away from public ownership to less accountable bodies, and the local enterprise partnership are funding it. But the biggest problem to me is that if I want to go and report on a local enterprise partnership meeting, I can't do that.
Yeah. Well, I think you describe it very well, and you've clearly researched it better than me, Tony.
Well, I've tried,
but let me say from my point, I agree. It's not an area I have in-depth knowledge, but I agree, and I agree with the points made so far. I think from our perspective, there are two main issues. Clearly, we're all agreed that partnerships can be useful to do bigger projects that connect different local authorities and can pull money from central government. So there's nothing wrong with partnerships in principle. Two issues we have. One is they really are not very transparent. Most people won't have heard of it. Most people will have no idea who sits on them. And even councillors have a pretty hard time finding out really how decisions are made. And there has been a suggestion, I think we've all read from an organisation called the Centre for Public Scrutiny, that if we're going to do more work through partnerships, then we need something like a local or regional audit committee, something like that has full access, not just to look at council data, but to look at related data from the businesses and all the organisations involved. And if I just make one other point, the other issue is I have no problem with businesses being involved in this, and that might surprise people, but I've been working in a business school for the last 10 years, and I work with multinationals from around the world on business. The issue here is that are other sectors who also create wealth and jobs adequately represented? All the organisation you mentioned there champion largely commercial for-profit businesses. I would like to see where's the representation from the social enterprise sector, major and growing player in the city. What about the voluntary and community sector? All of these run powerful organisations that create jobs and wealth. So my worry is we're not getting the diversity of views to really create real wealth for the city, and we get a narrow-minded approach.
What about you, Michael Frost, for the UKIP?
Well, the problem being the last person to speak is everybody's said just about everything that needs to be said. I concur with what Helen Holland has said as well. But I just made a few notes while everybody was talking, and the key issues that seem to come up as bullet points are they accountable? Can they be scrutinised? That creates public suspicion. How effective are they? What are the costs? And the whole thing hangs around transparency, as Councillor Hopkins said. And those are issues, I think, that are not healthy for something like this.